One of the things, Bart, that's been really fun for us is we have your 1988 Calgary ski jumper poster in our classroom.
Oh, really?
So when I came up with this idea, I was like, okay, Seth, who are your dream people that you could talk to? And you were top of his list. So
Oh,
when
good.
we confirmed with you, I texted him. I was like, Seth, sit down. Then tell me when you're sitting down. He's like, okay, I'm sitting down. Bart Forbes, April 10. He's really excited. So I
Good.
hope that we can get him on here. So, Seth, where are you? Oh, well, we'll just start without him. I'm recording, so we'll share it with him.
Okay.
Good morning. Thank you so much for making time to join us. How are you? You're in Dallas, is that correct?
That's correct, in Texas.
Dallas, Texas. We'll forgive that. I'm kidding. My entire family is actually from Denton.
Oh,
So,
not far from where I live.
oh, nice. Excellent. So tell us a little bit about your career, a little bit about how you got started, and tell us all the things.
All right. Boy, career. My career has been going on for over 50 years. I've done this for more than 5 decades. I was lucky to get into illustration when I did, because it's changed quite a bit. Today is not anywhere near like it was when I started out. But I went to the University of North Carolina, undergraduate degree, Bachelor of Arts. After a tour of duty in the Army, I was trying to decide what I should do. And my dad told me that he felt that I should pursue something that I really liked. He said, if you want to become a doctor, that's fine. But I knew what I really liked from the time I was a small child. I like to draw. I like to make pictures. And that's what I've done all my life. Growing up, I was always filling sketchbooks, and in my spare time, if I wasn't at school or playing baseball or something, I was drawing.
Nice.
So it was a very natural thing for me. And so he helped me. He said, you're going to need, I knew that I didn't know anything about earning a living as an artist. I didn't know the first thing about it. I didn't know there were illustrators. College didn't prepare me for any of that at North Carolina. So I knew a lot of art history, but that's about the best I got. So he put together, went to the library and did his research and sent away for catalogs to about 3 or 4 art schools around the country, art colleges that just taught art. And the one that appealed to me the most was the Art Center School in Los Angeles. So
nice.
Long story short, I applied and was accepted and went out there. It was a great experience for me because it opened my eyes to all the things you could do if you like to make pictures. You can become a graphic designer. You could become an illustrator. You could become an automotive designer. They had a big department there that designed cars for Detroit.
Yeah.
Trained people to design cars.
Right.
Had a big photography department, which interested me. I liked all of it. But I very quickly, first semester, figured out that I wanted to focus on illustration. And it also opened my eyes to a world that I was very unfamiliar with. I didn't know the names of any illustrators. Norman Rockwell, our family would get the Saturday Evening Post in the mail, and that was about what I saw, was what was on the cover of the Post. So I knew his work, but I didn't really know illustration, and I didn't know how to go about earning a living doing that. So that school, Art Center, opened my eyes to a lot of things. I became acquainted with the work of a lot of people who were really good at what they did, and all of that excited me. I became very energized about wanting to be an illustrator and wanting to make pictures and wanting to make that my life's vocation. So I took the classes. I did the best I could and everything. I wasn't very good, but I was real interested. I was dedicated. And
I would argue that dedication trumps talent any day of the week.
Talent's very overrated. People will say, "Well, I wish I had your talent." I'm not terribly talented. I never considered myself to be, but I work hard, and I care so much about it that I'll stay with it until it becomes something that's worthwhile.
Nice.
We've got another somebody named Seth. Hello, Seth.
Yeah, this is Seth. Seth is my co-teacher.
So sorry, guys. It wouldn't go through. So
it's all good.
Thank you, Betsy, for texting it to me at the end.
You bet. Technology's our friend.
Well, we're just chatting a bit about how I started out many years ago in the dark ages.
Right.
One of the things, Bart, that you said that I love, that I think is really true, is that when we first enter the creative fields, we frequently don't know the names of anyone else who does. Well, we don't know the names of any of the jobs, and we don't know the names of anyone else who does that job. One of the projects we ask our students to do is, we call it an inspiration family tree, and we ask them to go find designers and illustrators who are interesting to them. And so I was wondering if you could share with us some designers and illustrators who are interesting to you.
Oh, sure. Designers, among designers, my favorite designer is a guy who gave me my first job out of New York when I made that transition. His name is Martin Peterson. He goes by, his first initial is B.
Excellent.
Martin, Pedersen. He's today the publisher of Graphice, which
nice.
is an online magazine. You're probably familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
He gave me my very first job. He was the art director for American Way magazine. He didn't work for the magazine. He had his own design firm in New York, and he did art direction for airline magazines and people who didn't have a staff. And that's not why he's my favorite designer. It just happened that way. But it turned out I later did work for him for a magazine called Nautical Quarterly, which was a brilliantly designed magazine that was only published for about 3 or 4 years, totally dedicated to boating and all phases of boating. And it's just, those magazines today, they were done in the 70s, still stand up as great design, much better than most things you'll see today.
Nice.
There are a lot of other designers. When I was in school at Art Center, I was focused on illustration and who were the great illustrators beyond Norman Rockwell. And actually, I met Norman Rockwell.
Really?
I was at Art Center. I was going to get art supplies one morning at an art supply store called Michael's in Hollywood that we all used. And I was over there fairly early, hardly anybody in the store. And I noticed a guy at the cash register checking out. And I thought to myself, that looks like pictures I've seen of Norman Rockwell. Wow. And I thought, well, it can't be, because I knew he lived on the East Coast and New York and all of that. But I messed around and kept looking at him, and I became convinced that that's who it was. So I went over, stood behind him. When he finished checking out, I said, "Mr. Rockwell?" He turned around and said, "Yes." And it's exactly who he was. I introduced myself, and I said, I'm just a student here in Los Angeles, but I'm studying illustration, and I like your work, blah, blah. And he said, "Well, that's great." He said, "I've heard Art Center, heard a lot of good things about Art Center." I said, "Just out of curiosity, why are you in an art supply store in Los Angeles?" He said, "I came out here to photograph and sketch a fellow who's a member of the city council here who looks like Benjamin Franklin." He agreed to model for me. So he said, "I've got yet another Franklin painting to do for Saturday Evening Post, and I'm here to paint him." So we shook hands and off I went. It occurred to me 5 minutes later, I didn't get him to sign anything. but he said one thing that I do remember. I asked him, I said, you've been an illustrator all your life. Is there you have any advice? He said, yeah, always give it your very best. No matter what you're working on, make it your best. And he was right. I've always kept that in my mind, whether I'm working on a free job or whether I'm getting paid a lot or whether I'm working with a difficult art director or whatever the situation might be, always try to do your best work. And I haven't always done my best work. I've always tried to. So anyway, you want me to carry on with schooling and all that?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
I ended up at Art Center School, as I told you, and I was only there 3 semesters. I had come out of the Army. I knew I had to get going with some kind of a job. I didn't come from a wealthy family by any means. So my parents were supportive of me becoming an artist, but I know they were nervous about it because they didn't know anything about art careers either.
Right.
So I convinced them after a semester at Art Center, I felt like I've got this figured out now. I know how to become an illustrator. I know what graphic designers do. I know how all this fits together now, which I didn't before I went there. But I still had the problem of getting out of school and getting started. And back in those days, an illustrator starting out could get a job with a design studio, maybe. So that was my goal, was to go get a job. I left Art Center after 3 semesters. Did not get a degree there because I already had a bachelor's from UNC, and I wasn't there to get a degree. I was there to learn. So when I left, one of my professors was a man named John Lagata. And John was a famous illustrator back in the 20s for all the women's magazines in New York, a lot of advertising. He was very well known back then. And I had a couple of classes with him, and he seemed to like my work, and he advised me. Back then, anybody that left Art Center would automatically go to New York. That's how you made the big time. He said, don't go to New York. You'll get lost in the competition there. He said, you're not ready for that. He said, you need to go somewhere where you can hone your skills. And he said, go down to the Southwest, Houston, Dallas, go to Denver, go to a city like that will have some ad agencies. They'll have some opportunities for you. But I wouldn't recommend going to New York. So I took his advice, and I went to Houston and Dallas and made the rounds of the ad agencies and a handful of studios that existed at that time. And the very last place I called on in Dallas, I was prepared, had my stuff packed. I was ready to go to Detroit the next day and look into the automotive illustration. And the last place I visited in Dallas made me an offer, small studio, and hired me. I went to work for them. And I did a little bit of everything. I did storyboards for TV commercials, which were done by hand back then. It was before we had computers. I did photo layouts for ads, and occasionally I'd get to do a piece of finished art. And after about 2 years, I decided that my portfolio was ready. I kind of had the feel for how you interact with an art director or an ad agency, what pricing was, what my work was worth, just how I had the lay of the land. So I began freelancing and rented some studio space and began to made calls on people and began to get work. After about 5 years in Dallas doing that, I decided that I really needed to get to New York if I wanted to do magazine illustration, major national account, advertising accounts, paperbacks, all of that came out of New York City. So my wife encouraged me to go and to just go up there and start calling people. So I made 2 trips, made 1 trip to get the reaction to my portfolio, which I came home and put to use in doing some more pieces and trying to focus on having, what they told me was, we like your work, but you need a definite style and approach that is recognizable so that you're not an all-purpose person, that people will know what they're going to get from you when they hire you. And he was right. That was good advice. And the second trip I made up the following year to New York, I had only pieces that had the way I was working at the time. And that it enabled me to get an agent. I came up with a woman named Barbara Gordon, visited with me. She represented about 6 people, a couple photographers, 4 or 5 illustrators. And she said, I like your work and I would represent you, but you'd need to live up here. And I said, well, why is that? She said, well, all the illustrators live in New York or they live in Connecticut close by. And that's how the business works. I said, well, the post office had just begun express mail back then. And express mail was an overnight service. First time anybody had had something like that. I said, well, I've seen express mail promoted. What if I could get you, bless you, what if I could get you a project overnight? She said, well, that would work. You know, I said, well, they do overnight delivery. I said, I'll tell you what, let me leave my portfolio with you. And you think about it. If you want to show it, that's great. If you don't, that's okay. If you're uncomfortable after you've shown my portfolio and you don't want to do it, just put it in the box, send it back to me. No hard feelings. So she said, okay. So that was the beginning of about a 10-year relationship with her.
Wow.
She went out and called on the clients she always called on, art directors at agencies primarily, but some of the magazines, paperback publishers, record companies bought a lot of art for record albums back then because it was big format LPs.
Nice.
I began to get a lot of work. I began to get a lot of work. So I was very, very lucky. Then, you know, at that time I had to figure out, though, something that I hadn't experienced to that degree before: short deadlines and working for bigger clients that expected more from you. But I was willing to put in the work. I worked nights if I had to. I'd meet the deadline. And if I absolutely couldn't do it, I'd turn it down. But ad agencies back in those days, and maybe still, were short deadline people. We need this by Thursday, and they called you on a Monday.
Yep.
And, you know, you got to get the layout done, then you got to get the finish done. And I would normally be working on 2 or 3 projects at the same time. Not all short deadline, but maybe a couple longer deadline and 1 short. It was a great experience. I learned a great deal from that. And over time, I began to think my rep, for one thing, ended up growing to about 25 people. And I wasn't getting the kind of representation I felt like I needed. She didn't need to have everybody busy. All she needed to have was 3 or 4 busy at the time.
Right.
And as a result, I thought, you know, this has gotten too big. It works for the rep, but it's not working for me as an artist. I need somebody that will help my career grow. So I switched to another rep, which lasted 6 or 7 years, and then I decided just to represent myself. By the time I had a bit of a reputation, I felt like I could do that. And this was still before the computer. So I was doing it with mailings. I'd get a mailer done. I'd ship it to art directors that I wanted to work for, or art directors that I had worked for. And I had people too that knew me that at that time that would reuse me. So people I'd worked with for a number of years. I ended up getting quite a bit of work from the National Football League. Number of clients like that. The PGA Tour became a really good client. I decided late 80s there was a recession going on, and the agencies had pulled back, weren't spending much money on illustration, anything they didn't have to do. So illustration became a luxury. I wasn't getting as much work, so I had done a couple of paintings for a golf tournament. So I did a little brochure and sent that out to a directory I was able to obtain from the PGA of all their golf tournaments. And I sent it to the directors of those tournaments. I was dealing now direct with clients and not with art directors. These are not people that are accustomed to buying art. But I didn't need everybody to buy into it. I just needed a few. And I began to get responses from the mailer, and I ended up getting a good number of tournaments, quite a few that turned out to be pretty good jobs because they were big paintings that got used for program covers, posters, wide variety of promotional material for the tournament. So that worked out well. But I along the way, if you look at my work, a lot of it has become or tended to become sports oriented. And that came from doing a project for Sports Illustrated in the early 80s. And it was a boxing assignment that Richard Gangle gave me. And Richard was a legendary art director. He'd been at Sports Illustrated a long time back then. I had wanted to work for him. He's a guy who had bought illustration from people like Bob Peake and Mark English and Austin Briggs, a wide variety of people, and just let them do their thing. And I thought those are dream assignments, and I'd like to be able to do something like that. So he hired me for a boxing assignment, and it worked out pretty well. And I ended up doing a number of illustrations for a number of years for SI. And that magazine at that time, I don't know if it does now, but at that time it had a wide circulation. Lots of people saw it. And other art directors and other people began to see what I was doing for the magazine and would hire me for sports assignments. So it quickly became a situation where most of what I was doing was sports oriented, even though I didn't set out to do that. I like sports and have always been a fan of baseball and basketball and golf and a number of things, but I like to do all kinds of things as an artist. Mm-hmm. So I still do occasional sports jobs, and I still do illustration in a sense, but it's not what it was back then. The computer changed everything, and people are now able to do art on software. And Photoshop and other software applications, and if you look at an Illustrator's annual from 1980 and an Illustrator's annual from today, and I'm sure you have, you'll see a huge difference. In 1980, 100% of the work in there was done by hand. It was either drawn or painted, or it was a hand-created piece of art. Today, when you look at an Illustrator's annual, I would bet 80% of it is done on a computer. Not that that's bad, but it's changed the business a great deal. Yeah. And it's the fees that an ad agency will pay for illustration are not what you would have gotten even in 1980. And that's, inflation has taken hold since then too. So it's not as lucrative per piece that an illustrator would get to do for a magazine. Magazines don't pay any more, if not less, than they did back then. Yeah. So it's a harder field to navigate today. I was lucky I came along when I did. About close to 20 years ago now, I decided that I wanted to do gallery art. I wanted to start painting for myself. Mm-hmm. I could see how illustration was going. I wouldn't be able to continue to do magazine illustration and the stuff I'd been doing for a lot of years. So I decided I wanted to do that, but then I found quickly that that's a whole different line of work. It's a different audience. You're painting to the general public, and you're painting with no idea whether that painting will ever sell or not. So illustration always had a budget attached to it. I knew I'd be paid when I finished the job. Mm-hmm. With fine art, gallery art, nobody pays you up front. You have to do the paintings, hopefully get a show, get 2 or 3 galleries to represent you. And they don't know you from Adam as an illustrator.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a whole different business. But I did a little bit at a time, and I realized fairly quickly that I needed to pick a subject matter. And I decided that the easier subject matters to do, well, you could always do abstract art. That's a subject matter in itself. But I wasn't interested in doing abstract. I'm a figurative kind of person. What I do is pretty representational, even though I really wanted to use fine art to experiment, which I have. But I decided that landscape, portraiture, still life, those things are timeless. They've been around for several hundred years. And there's no reason you can't reinvent any of those and do it in your own way. So I decided to limit what I did to landscape and still life. And along the way, I pretty much eliminated the still life because it bored me. I got bored with it. But landscape is endless possibilities, and that's what I primarily do now. And I love it. I love making that transition. And there are a lot of things that applied from the illustration days, but the landscapes I do are not figurative. There are no people in them. I don't include buildings or anything. They're purely, a lot of them are just out of my memory, out of my mind. And I never did an illustration from memory. I always had photo reference. I always did my research. With these, I don't do a whole lot of research other than just observation. And I try to keep it that way. I try to keep it very intuitive, instinctive in the way I approach it. What else can I tell you? That's pretty much the span of my career. I've got a bunch of paintings and things you can see behind me that I can show you if you'd like to see them.
We would love that.
Bart?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt here. I have a couple more questions I'd like to ask you before we move forward, if that's cool.
I love that. Sure.
Okay. First of all, it is an honor to see you in person. And the fact that I'm talking to Bart Forbes, who is one of the golden era illustrators in my book for the rest of my life, is a dream come true.
Well, you're very kind.
Thank you. Thank you for this.
Sure. Thank you.
I'm going to just, you've answered a few of them, but there's a few that I would like to still go over with you. Going back to your illustration career, in my eyes, you are one of the most prolific illustrators there were. And when I left fine art to start studying illustration, the classroom that I came in, there was your Olympic ski jumper poster hanging up. And so that was my first impression of you. And as soon as I found out your name, I started to devour all the Society of Illustrator annuals. Anything that looked like Bart Forbes, I was a fan of. And here we are in 2020, and you are, in my eyes, the last of that generation of these heavy hitters.
You may be right.
And so that's what's so exciting about this, to get to talk to you. Anyway, during that time, your heyday, when you were illustrating, when you got inducted into Society of Illustrators, what was the atmosphere of illustrators then, and who were some of your other, not competition, but other illustrators of the same time that you really admired and considered friends?
Well, that's an easy question. There were many. Illustration back in those days that was great. I have wonderful memories of the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, in that era. because there was a lot of work being done, and there were a lot of good illustrators. I became friends with Mark English, who was a hero of mine in school. Eventually met him down here. He came down to speak to one of our clubs, Art Director Club, and I introduced myself, and we became acquainted, and I later taught with him in Illustrators workshop that he and his son did for a number of years. We were good friends, and he passed away, as you know, this last year.
Yes.
And we talked on the phone a good many times over the last few years. He lived up in Kansas City near there, and me down here, but we talked quite a bit. He'd always say, his gravelly voice, he'd say, I'm the last, you and me were the last ones. He said, everybody else is gone. Yeah. I said, well, hang in there. I'm 80. I turned 80 last year. And Mark was 83, 84 when he died. He's a few years older than me. There aren't many of us that worked in the style or the genre, I guess you'd call it, of realistic illustration in different styles. Mark, Bernie Fuchs, another fella who I admired a great deal when I was starting out. Fred Ottness, Jack Unruh. Jack, another wonderful illustrator from Dallas. He and I, along with another designer named Jack Summerford, bought a building here back in the 80s and turned it into studio space, and we had studios together.
Really?
And Jack and I he was upstairs and I was downstairs, and I'd hear him shout, Forbes, I need some advice. So he'd either bring his piece down or I'd go up there. What's wrong with the color on this piece? Well, I don't know. And so we'd talk about it. And I do the same with him. And he became my favorite model for, I was doing some work for Sports Afield magazine, and it was usually a fishing assignment. And Jack was a big fisherman. So he had all the gear and everything, the hat and the vest and all that stuff. So he would pose for me, and I'd paint him. And after about 3 or 4 assignments like that, the art director at Sports Afield told me, he said, could you use somebody besides the gray-haired guy with the beard? He said, it's becoming, I said, that's Jack Unruh, who also worked for them. He said, I didn't know that. He said, well, use somebody else anyway. So I had to get a different model, but I knew Jack for 30 years, and good friend. And he died about 3 years ago, and I miss him a great deal because we talked constantly about the business, he'd call me up. I got a strange project here. Do you think I'm charging enough for it? And we talk about pricing and compare notes, and it's invaluable to have people like that you know and can confide in. Those guys, growing up, in college and in school, I became fascinated with the Impressionist painters. I loved Degas' work, and I liked Monet, and I still do today. Those guys were way ahead of their time, and they set a pattern for change in the art world that affected, not only fine art, but illustration as well. But Mark English and the other guys that I just mentioned were the guys that I knew best. John Collier is a friend of mine. John was an excellent illustrator for a long time. He's moved into doing religious sculpture, and he's an excellent.
Really?
Yeah. He's terrific. He works primarily for churches and that sort of thing. He has a representative that gets him those assignments, and that's pretty much all he does. That's what he wanted to do. Wow. So he made an oblique turn. He's younger than I am, but John's in his 70s, so he's up there too. and he lives not far from me. We see one another occasionally. We had lunch a couple of weeks ago, but
That's fantastic.
gosh, who else? There's so many back then. There were a lot of illustrators that I came to admire and know. Bob Heindel, excellent draftsman, illustrator. The big difference today from back then, this is not what you asked, but I'm going to throw it in anyway.
No, this is great.
Is drawing ability. I don't think that young artists today, for the most part, and I know there are exceptions to this, but learn how to draw like we did back then. I had to know how to draw to do what I did. And so did the other people I just mentioned. Draftsmanship, Jack Unruh was a wonderful draftsman. Pen and ink guy. Didn't work like I did at all, but he could draw anything right out of his head. Drawing is a tool that leads to your mental understanding of what you're doing. To be able to sketch it out without having to find a photo or find reference material. To be able to just sit down and draw an idea is a great thing for a designer or an illustrator, either one. I just think that's a skill that I see kind of going away as I look at annuals and I see all the stuff that's done on computers. I see an absence of drawing, and I also see a lot of work beginning to look alike. Not beginning to, it has for a number of years, and one person's piece will look like another person's like another person. It's hard to be unique working digitally.
Yeah,
there are some that are, but it's not like it was back when I started out. Everybody had different styles back then, and it was a lot of fun to see what people came up with every month or so. You'd see magazines, and the women's magazines like Ladies' Home Journal, McCall's, Good Housekeeping. They all bought fiction art, and I did a lot of work for them. I know Mark did. And those assignments allowed you to do storytelling and experiment a little bit. So art directors would go to the newsstands and they'd pick them up every month to see what everybody's doing or see if there's anybody new. And there was an appetite for illustration that I don't think exists now. I really think it's kind of disappeared. I hope it comes back. I like to think that it might, but I don't think it'll ever be like that again.
Sure.
And I'm grateful that I had that opportunity.
It's so fantastic, Bart. Thank you for saying that. You bring up a great point, because you do, in Society of Illustrator, you see a lot of really slick, polished stuff, but a lot of times it just doesn't have that same substance to it. It doesn't have that glow that like we were talking about in the earlier annuals. And I do recognize a lot of things that get pushed through and passed by as acceptable now. And it really feels like, to me, the bar has come down really low compared to your great time and the time before that. And I'm in that same boat. I really believe we're getting to a point in society now that we're losing that ability to create with our hand, and we're relying on another aspect of it. And I think we're seeing it in so many different things, where people are relearning how to use their hands and learning how to sew, learning how to do things that were normal to us, but got kind of pushed over. And so I really feel like we're starting to see some of this come alive again, which is really exciting. I know, true. Yeah, and I know it will never be like the time that you guys got to shine. But what's so exciting, Bart, is the fact that to hear this coming from you being one of the top dogs and seeing the industry change. And I know a lot of illustrators, once they get out of the commercial side of it, they usually always gravitate towards the fine art side. So is that a reality of most illustrators? Once they've gotten out of the commercial side, are you seeing more and more of them leaning towards the gallery work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very definitely. I just had a visit from my friend Michael Dudash, whose work you may or may not know. He's now in Idaho, and he's very successful as a Western painter. He paints very much the same way he always did as an illustrator. He just does these big Western scenes of Indians, and he's outstanding. Michael's always been a very, very talented guy, and he's as busy as he can be with that. But he, comparing notes with him, we both know that it's an entirely different thing. You produce the painting before you ever sell it. Right. And you have to really hustle. He does a lot of things through entering shows, painting shows, Western art. And he said that helps him a great deal. I haven't done much of the show entering. I've stuck pretty much to the galleries, but there's a way that's different from back when we were calling on art directors, but there's a process that you can take as a fine artist to become known and have your work out there. You have to have something to say. It's got to be good. Right. And Michael is excellent, and I'm glad he's successful at what he's doing. Mark, of course, turned to fine art, Mark English, probably 30 years ago, back in the 90s. He quit doing illustration for the most part and began doing landscapes and ended up doing all kinds of very fanciful kinds of things because he wanted to experiment and grow and do what he wanted to do. And he was very successful with it. There are others. Most illustrators have had to do something else. Right. They just, like I mentioned, John Collier, he made the decision that he had to do something different, and what he wanted to do was sculpture, which is kind of surprising. And he's just an excellent sculptor. Look up his art, Google it.
I definitely will.
He has a rep who has the website, and it shows quite a few of his pieces, but they're big monumental sculptures.
That's awesome. Wow.
And he stays pretty busy and enjoys what he's doing. Most of us have. We've changed. Technology changed everything. Technology changed a lot of different things in life, not just art. Mm-hmm. But it and not for the better, as I've already said. I've been asked a good many times, why don't you experiment with software? You could come up with a way of working, and I'm sure I could. But I like having a painting when I'm done. I like having a piece of art
yes.
that you can put a frame on, hang on a wall.
Yes.
I don't want it to exist on a disc.
Right.
Digital form, which most of these, if you look at the Illustrators annuals today, most of that art exists in digital form unless they print it out. But then it's just a print. It's a digital print. I like something that's actually got paint on it. And so I've never done a piece that way. Everything I've ever done, I've created by hand. And that's the way it'll always be, because that's just what I do.
I think it's wonderful to hear this. And you brought up the Western art movement that's going on. A friend of mine and my mentor, Thomas Blackshear, he has left the illustration world and he has moved into the Western world now. And what's so neat about it is this year he's getting inducted into Society of Illustrators. And he said, yes, into the Hall of Fame. And when they contacted him, he was like, I didn't even think you guys knew who I was anymore. And whoever he spoke to at Society was like, Thomas, we have been following your path since.
It takes a little effort to find a lot of us to find our work anymore.
Right.
But thanks to the computer, that makes it possible to do pretty quickly. And Tom Blackshear is an excellent artist. He worked with Mark English for a number of years.
Right.
Starting out. and then before he started freelancing, and he's a tremendous painter. Excellent.
You know, I'm excited to tell him that we had this interview with you.
Yeah, tell him I said hello.
I absolutely will. But he said really what he's noticed is the shift is now really the money is in the Western art world. And what's so cool about it is because I feel like most illustrators are draftsmen and they understand that design principle and they apply that into your work. And I think when you transition from illustration into the fine art side, you definitely have a different look with your work because you have that background as an illustrator. So you have an understanding of that craftsmanship. So I can really tell people that have had design in their composition, it has a different voice. And I just think, you know, okay, if illustration is not the way to go, you're still creating art. It just, you have a different audience now, maybe a wider audience. And I think that's really exciting that you guys have all been able to transition from that commercial side to more of a fine art approach to, you know, showing your work and having a different audience. Bart, let me ask you something here. Now that, you know, we still have future illustrators, students that want to get into this field, being so much different than when you were starting out, do you feel it would be the same method as far as getting in contact with different art directors, having their portfolios shown? What's any advice that you would have for a young illustrator starting to step into that reality of the real life finishing in college?
Well, the advice I'll go back to what I said earlier. I would advise anybody who wants to become an illustrator to learn how to draw. Pretend that there is no computer and learn how to draw. Learn how to use your hands and your head and your mind. Learn how to draw, whether it's realistic or whether it's fanciful, whatever it might be. Learn how to put pencil to paper and how to draw pictures, how to draw images. Once you feel like you've got that in your mind, that tool that you're going to need, then you can still do computer work. You can still work on a computer, but you have that knowledge. You can sketch an idea for yourself or for a client, just out of your head. You can sketch how it might work, how it might compose. Those skills are, I think, vital to doing good work. Then I've been away from it so long. I don't know the reps anymore, the agents in New York. I'm sure they're still there, but you don't have to be in New York anymore. This little story I told you about starting out with my rep, I may have been the first guy to pull that off because nobody else lived away from New York City at that time and did any work there. But I was able to because of the overnight mail, and then very shortly thereafter FedEx came into being, and of course FedEx is next day anywhere you want it. So people began to live other places, and illustrators would live all over the country, some in Europe, other countries, and still be able to do work for publishers anywhere else. So location isn't important anymore. But what is important for a young artist, I think, is to have some ability to interact with other artists. It's very, very difficult, I think, to just be by yourself and create and be creative every day. When you get up, go create. I think you need the inspiration that you get from talking to other artists. I think you need just the feel that you get from having a common understanding with someone else, like lawyers talking to other lawyers. I'm sure that it's hard to run a law office by yourself. It helps to know other people in that business, and so I think that's important in figuring out where you're going to locate. And then I would, if it were me, I'd probably go to New York and size up the situation. Talk to reps, talk to art directors, take your portfolio and talk to people and get a sense from them as to what they look for, what they pay, and how they select artists. Do they use, there are a lot of directories now that are published that you can go through there and look at 300 different artists, and a lot of art directors might do that. Do they talk to reps? Do reps come to see them with artists? I don't know if they do that anymore. If you're a art director at Sports Illustrated, and they hardly buy any illustration anymore, but in a situation where they might, how do they make that selection? Well, the way to find out is go talk to them.
That's good.
Once you have that in your mind, then you'll know how to approach it. You'll know how to reach the area you need to get to. If it's reps, you need to go talk to reps, get somebody to handle your work. If it's not, if I'm sure there are a lot of art directors now that just use the computer, and they go through the computer and research. If they've got an illustration assignment that comes up, they'll Google some names. They'll find artists that way. So if that's the way to reach them, then develop your website and do your research. Find out what their email addresses are. Find out a nice way to approach them with a non-wordy website that just shows good work. It shows how you work. I think it can probably be done that way today. I think, for instance, I have, with my fine art, gallery art, I decided to do some of that to have some notoriety outside of doing gallery shows. It would be a good idea to connect with art consultants around the country. And there are a lot of them. In any major city, all over the West Coast, Denver, Chicago, New York, down here, there are art consultants who are, in a way, they're not really interior designers. They work with interior designers who have a client who has an art need, and they bring art to that project. So they're hired to do that. So I did my research. I went online, I contacted people. I found out who are these people, and I found out what are their email addresses, how do I contact them? And today, I began this several years ago, but I'll do an email maybe ideally once a month, but I get busy, and I probably do one maybe 4 or 5 times a year. And it'll be an interior. Maybe it's a hospital interior, maybe it's an office interior, maybe it's a restaurant interior, maybe it's a home interior with one of my paintings on the walls. And I go shoot it. If it's something specific I want to do, I'll just create it. I'll get my daughter to help me, and she's a graphic designer, and she'll help me Photoshop it into an interior that I've shot. Fantastic. I'll go over to a bank or something, and I'll put one of my paintings on their wall in Photoshop. Anyway, I'll send out something like that. Or if, here's a recent painting that was installed at such and such law offices, and I'll send out a photo of that with a very short verbiage of just wanted to connect with you again, show you a recent piece I've done. If I can ever be of help to you in any of your projects, don't hesitate to contact me. Email address, boom. And I've gotten quite a bit of work off of that. Sometimes it's reproductions, maybe a Giclée reproduction if the client doesn't have a budget for an original. And sometimes it's an original painting or paintings. I did some work earlier this year for a office complex in Houston that needed some stuff like I do, and they like my work. So I did 4 paintings for them. So, nice. So that's another way of marketing what you do. And to go back to your question, how does a young artist approach this? Sometimes it just pays to be inventive and think about, okay, if I were an art director, or if I were an art buyer, if I had a need for art for a wall or art for a magazine or whatever, how would I find that? And what can I do as an artist to make sure that that buyer knows who I am? Mm-hmm. Now, they're not all going to love you. They're not all going to like what you do, but you don't need all of them. If you send out, my mailing list is probably 200 people at most, maybe less than that. And they come and go. Mm-hmm. Some of them are only at it for a while. Then I get an email back. I've quit doing that. I've opened a grocery store. You know, they come and go because that's a tough business too. Mm-hmm. But I keep that list and I send it to them, and I'll bet half that list I get responses from. They like the work, and every now and then one of them will call and they've shown my work to somebody. I've got an art consulting group in Atlanta that's come back several times with art for hotels. They do primarily hotels, and that's a great way to make some money. Reproductions, that's fine. I don't mind providing giclées because I don't have to do a painting for that. Right. And it gets my work out onto a hotel wall where people see it. Right. So visibility is everything, whether it's over the internet or whether it's getting your work hung somewhere where a lot of people will see it. Marketing, you just got to market your stuff. You've got a product. How are you going to get it in front of people?
Perfect. Bart, one of our students would like to know, how do you handle burnout?
That's an interesting question. I don't get burned out. Now, you might think to look at me at my age that I probably burned out all the time, but I'm really not. I like what I do. I get up in the morning and I've always got something I'm working on, whether it's a landscape painting or something else. And I like to be excited about what I do. And, people have asked me, people always ask me if I'm talking to a group, what's your favorite painting? I don't have a favorite painting. My favorite painting is the next one. I'm always trying to do something that's better than I've done before. And I try real hard to do that. I want to get better. And I want the next one to be something, wow, and it's hard to do. But
fantastic.
That's the way I look at it. Burnout is not something I've ever really experienced. Back when I did a lot of, when I told you I always had 2 or 3 projects going at one time, I was really busy. Even then, I didn't get burned out. I didn't get tired of it because I was doing something I like to do. Right. And what I would do is, married with 2 kids, and we'd go on a trip, go on a vacation, and I'd back away from it. But anymore, if I go on a trip, I've got my little watercolor pad, and I'm doing sketching and watercolors because I like to do that on a trip. I'd rather do that than take photos, even though I do that too. But it's fun to do a little 20-minute sketch, because when you look at that sketch now, I can remember where I was that day and what I was doing and what the temperature was and whether the sun was out or not, and all the things that go with it. So I guess I've just what I'm telling you is I've always liked to make pictures, and I still do.
It's fantastic.
So
what's your favorite? Wow, what is your favorite medium, Bart?
Oil. I work primarily in oils on canvas. You want to see some of my stuff?
Yes, please.
I'll show you a few things. I
you,
even
Bart.
dug out some old stuff
Fantastic.
that I don't do anymore. These, I worked in watercolor for probably 25 years. And I switched to oils. Burnout is an interesting term. I wasn't burnt out, but I was repeating myself with the watercolors. I got to where I didn't feel I was fresh or inventive. I was just kind of doing the same thing over and over again. And I needed something to change that. And I didn't quite know what to do. And I got a call from an interior designer to ask me to do a 15-foot tall painting for a sports complex that was being built. And I turned the job down. I said, I can't do a 15-foot painting in watercolor. I said, you got the wrong guy. They called back and they said, well, the builder of the sports club really likes your work and would like to know what you might suggest. Can you come out here and look at it? I said, okay. So I went out, and the interiors were all up. I lost you guys.
I just made you big. It's
Oh,
okay. Our one of our students said, could we see him instead of you?
Okay, so you can still see me?
Yes, we can still see you.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Well, I told them, okay, so I went out, I looked at they had a giant wall. That's why they wanted this 15-foot painting, and they wanted 6 different sports represented in the painting. Well, I didn't want to do that. I said, why don't you do 6 paintings that are smaller than that and group them on the wall. Then if you want to change the wall 2 years from now, you'll have paintings that you can hang other places. Where if you do a 15-foot painting, you're not going to be able to hang that anywhere else. And they thought, oh, that makes sense. That's a good idea. So I ended up doing the job, but I still had to work about 4 feet wide on those paintings, 4 or 5 feet, which was way bigger than anything I'd ever done before. So I couldn't do it in watercolor because I couldn't get a watercolor board that big. So I got out the oils that I still had from my school days, and I started trying to do the first painting. I had little sketches, and I was having a lot of trouble getting the first painting done. I realized the scale was throwing me off, so I went back to doing something that I'd learned in one of my classes at Art Center of doing little 1-inch, 2-inch sketches. I'd do a little tiny sketch where they're not doing any details or anything, just figuring out composition and color scheme. And that made all the difference. Then I sailed through those 6 paintings. And from there on, I was energized by the medium of doing oils on canvas and working bigger. So I decided to switch to oils at that time. And I've been working for the last 30 years in oils on canvas primarily.
It's amazing, Bart.
This goes back to watercolor time. This is illustration for probably McCall's or Ladies Home Journal, one of those. I did a lot of this for a number of years. And they were all fiction stories, short stories that had to do with women and children primarily, because they were women's magazines. And I'd get models, I'd get people I know, take photos, figure out a composition and do the piece. And they all tended to be similar. A lot of stuff back in those days, art directors really liked combination of images, a montage kind of feel. I did a lot of that kind of thing. I got burnt out on that. I got really tired of doing that because it was a design problem on top of an illustration problem. And
yeah.
I got to where I didn't want to combine different elements in one painting anymore, and I got away from it. But it took a conscious effort, and then it became unpopular, so I didn't have to turn anything down. Same thing, watercolor.
Wow.
I was using some dyes back in these days, and the aniline dyes there was a company called Dr. Martin's, and it may still be a company do they still make that product?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I found after I kind of developed a style around it, this is the style I took to New York, and I found that they faded badly.
Oh.
With any kind of window light, sunlight, they just start fading away. I had done a painting for my wife's brother and his wife when they got married as a wedding gift. And we went to see him a couple of years later, and it had practically vanished off the wall.
Oh, no.
It was so gradual, they didn't notice it. But I noticed it immediately. And so I just, boom, one day I just quit. I stopped using those. I went over and bought some Winsor Newton watercolors, tube watercolors, and I started doing watercolors.
Wow.
And they didn't work this exact same way. The dyes I loved because they were so bright, and you could paint one into the other wet, and they did marvelous things. Watercolors didn't work that way, but with a little effort, I became able to paint with the watercolors. But the switch to oils was another major move for me, and I really like doing oils, and I can work larger. This is a paperback cover. This is 1980, probably.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
The area
Beautiful.
is for the title and the author and type. There's a collection of poetry, as I recall.
That's perfect. Our students right this second are working on a book jacket in which they have to leave space for the type.
Oh, okay. Well, that's typical with book illustration.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another one, paperback wraparound, science fiction. For about 3 or 4 years, I had a publisher in New York that thought I could do science fiction. I'd never done science fiction. I had no interest in it, but they insisted. So I did probably a dozen or so covers like this that were just fanciful kinds of things that were very different from anything else I'd ever done. But that didn't hold a future for me. I'm not a science fiction guy. But they're fun to do. And again, this area is for the title type on the title page. It wraps around to the back. And there's, I left some, they wanted a little room for a couple of paragraphs.
Fantastic.
When I did switch to oil, I began doing things like these. This is a story illustration for Boys Life magazine. And when I switched to oils, I tended to handle them in the same way that I did the watercolors. So I would use them very thinned out. I didn't paint opaque. I painted very thin, and most people thought they were watercolors. But I would paint very thin, and if I had a dark area, I might glaze over once or twice more to get it to where it's really dark. So they're, different way of working, but a way that I like. I mentioned doing golf tournaments. This is a fair-size painting of for a golf tournament out in Portland, Oregon. Again, done in sort of an oil wash.
Wow, Bart.
And I used photos that I had shot. I went out there and shot golfers playing that course and used that for reference material. Always, in something like this, I'm always looking for a way to tell the story of that golf course without just showing a painting of a golf hole. In this instance, it was the tree and the shade that made the composition. And I look for stuff like that. It's the design eye that I put to work when I'm photographing for something like this. I'm always thinking about how can I create a composition that's interesting, that's not like everything else you've seen. And I guess that's how I always look at things. How can I design this so it has a feel unto itself that's not like other paintings. Most people that do golf art, they just paint a scene from the tee looking out at a landscape, which is fine, but there's a ton of paintings like that.
Right.
I'd rather do something unique. Let's see.
One of our students would love to hear you talk about the saxophone player that we see in the background.
Okay. This is a CD cover. I actually did this just about 6 years ago.
Wow.
This is Stan Getz, great sax player, jazz guy. And this is part of a series of jazz pieces that I did for CD covers for Verve Records. They were compilations of, there were CD boxes, actually, compilations of each artist's work. It's interesting looking at it on my screen. His face is very green looking.
Right.
But here, looking at it, it's not.
Okay.
The computer can fool you a little bit. I'll show you some more from that series.
Sure.
This is Wes Montgomery.
Beautiful.
Love doing this painting. This was great fun. He of course, was deceased and tremendous guitar player. I used 2 or 3 different photos of him, of his hands and then face to make this one work. The only correction I got back, and as an illustrator, you get corrections. They wanted the cigarette taken out of his mouth because they said that their European sales are never very good if there's a cigarette in the image. So I said, well, yeah, I can do that. So I painted it out, and they did the cover. Here it is. There's the CD cover. But when I got it back, or I didn't get it back, I never sent him the painting. I just sent him a digital scan. I took the painting and put the cigarette back in because I really liked it. And that was part of his character. He always smoked on the job. Always had a cigarette going. So people who knew him as that guy. But anyway, that's how it was used in a box set of recordings.
Nice.
And another box set from that series of Ella Fitzgerald.
Wow.
That's the painting.
Oh, wow.
She was a lot of fun to do. But my original sketches, which were done just in pencil, they're black and white sketches. They were more somber, like she might have been doing a ballad. And they said, most of the images you see of her like that, we want her smiling. So I was able to find a good shot of her singing with a big smile. And I had to put together the rest of it, the hand and holding the microphone and everything. But
Bart, is that in gouache or is that also oil?
It's oil.
It is oil. Wow, her dress looks so amazing. How opaque it looks. It's almost popping off the
oil
screen
on canvas. The dress is somewhat opaque. When I have to, I use opaque, and in my landscape paintings, I do a lot of opaque painting.
Yeah.
But starting out, as I began to do oils years ago, I did them pretty much like I did watercolors, and then it evolved as I went along and incorporated opaque paint as well. One
of our students, Bart, would like to know, how do you come up with your ideas and your composition and your shapes? Do you have a specified process, or is it just play and practice?
Well, that's an interesting question. To go back to what we were talking about earlier, I think more than anything else, it's what I've stored up here for 80 years. I just have an intuitive feel for, I'll mull it over in my mind. If I get an assignment like one of those program cover or one of those CD covers, I can look at reference and that gives me a lead, but the best thing I can do is just mull it over in my mind, maybe do a little sketching on paper and come up with a direction that I'm trying to go and see if I can't sell that to the art director. I don't have I don't really have a procedure other than that. I depend on my memory and my sense of design to tell me what'll work, and usually something will come up. These are sketches, very small sketches, for a mural project I did for PGA Tour for their clubhouse at Ponte Vedra in Florida, probably 6-7 years ago. They wanted the actual painting. This painting is 7 feet wide, so big art. In recent years, I've been asked to do a lot of big stuff, and this is how I approach something like that. This is as much for them as it is for me. It could be a little looser than that for my own use, but the creative director at PGA he said they're going to want to see what they're going to get. So I did this. I don't know if you can tell. It's rough,
Yeah.
but it's not nearly as finished as the big painting is. But it allows them to tell exactly how I'm going to compose it, color scheme, all that sort of thing. This one's 10 feet wide.
Wow.
Tiger Woods winning a tournament there at that course.
Man.
So they gave me the subject matter, the things they wanted me to do, and I did 7 different paintings for them. One of which was a disaster, but that's another story. So let's see.
Fantastic.
We have one of our students who's a cowgirl, and she lives on a ranch. She's got 600 head of cattle.
Good for
She's
her.
dying to hear you talk about the cowboy that we can see in the background.
Yes. Miley?
Yeah, of course it's Miley. She's like, could he talk about the cowboy on the horse?
Yeah, this is a guy. I can't get too close to the screen because you won't be able to see him. You turn it where you can.
Perfect.
How's that?
That's perfect.
Excellent, Bart.
What?
That's excellent.
This is a painting I did actually for a poster publisher in New York, Bruce McGaw Graphics, and it was done strictly to produce as a for sale to the public poster, and it originally did not have the covered wagons in the background. I photographed this guy on a ranch not too far from here, and he's just a terrific looking cowboy. He wore glasses. In the original painting, I had glasses on him, but I decided that probably is not a good look for a cowboy. But I later had another client that liked this piece and wanted to commission something similar, didn't have the budget for a full piece. I said, well, we can use this. And they said, well, can you put some covered wagons in the background? So I did, and I really like it better with the wagons now. Gives a little depth to it.
Yeah.
But this is oil wash again. And this is probably close to 30 years ago.
Wow.
Gorgeous.
Wow, Bart.
Just gorgeous.
What else? Another cowboy. This is a cover for Boys Life magazine.
Beautiful.
Several years back. And again, I used reference material from another. Actually, it was a ranch that my son was attending a summer camp at, and they had a little rodeo. We went to pick him up, so I took that opportunity to shoot a lot of photos and had one that worked for this.
Beautiful, Bart.
And the book cover that can't remember the title of the book, but it was a fun piece to do. Totally different from my usual subject matter. Got another painting over here that's fairly recent, actually.
Wow.
I don't know if you can see it. It's the owner of the Cowboys with his stadium in the background. I did this for AT&T. They wanted to use this as a gift to present him when he was inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame last year. So I did it. I have it back now to make a color change on the background. They didn't like the sky color, so I changed it, made it bluer, and I'm waiting for them to come and get it.
Awesome.
You want to see some of the gallery painting I'm doing?
Oh, yes, please. Seth and I, as soon as the quarantine is lifted, Seth and I are taking a road trip to Telluride to go to your gallery there.
Yes.
Well, Telluride is no longer my gallery.
Oh, no.
The guy that ran it sold Telluride Gallery year before last. And the people that bought it, I never actually talked to. There was a woman running the gallery just before he sold it that tried to cheat me on a painting.
Oh.
It didn't tell me it had sold for 6 months. And that didn't go well. The owner was not happy about it, and maybe it's why he sold the gallery. Anyway, the new owners kept her on.
Oh.
And when they didn't contact me, I knew that that's why. She didn't want to have to face me again.
Yeah.
So I'm not in that gallery anymore. Just
That's too bad.
that incident took me out of it. Although it was a good gallery, I sold a lot of work there. Postage stamps. I thought you might like to see a couple.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
That's the Reagan stamp I did. What would have been his 100th year when they published that. And the Sarah Vaughan stamp that came out a couple of years ago, which I enjoyed doing because, as I've said, I love jazz. I love music.
Do you listen to music while you paint?
Yeah, I listen to jazz.
Excellent.
Sirius XM has a really good jazz station. There are a couple of others. There's a jazz station at University of North Texas in Denton that's fun to listen to. Let me show you a couple of things here. You were asking about preliminaries. This is what I do when I'm putting down ideas for paintings,
Nice.
for landscapes. This is how I start almost all of them, with a little sketch, usually an idea sketch out of my head, something I've been thinking about, trying to make color notes. Some of these might actually become paintings, some I discard. It's a little bit like, I saw an interview with Woody Allen a few years ago, and said he had a drawer in his bedroom where he would jot down ideas for scripts, and he'd throw them in the drawer. So when he had spare time and finished a movie or something, the way he'd get started on the next one would be to go through his drawer and pick out an idea that he liked and then develop it. Wow. It's a little bit the same way. I do a lot of these little sketches, and I've got them stacked around, and when I'm getting ready to do a new painting, I'll go look at them and see if anything inspires me. I also do sketches like this for paintings prior to do. I don't always do this. Sometimes I go straight from the pen and ink sketch or the pencil sketch, but these frequently help me if I'm trying to develop a color scheme. And I'm not
you do
sure
those
about
sketches in oil, or is that?
Yeah, it's on oil. It's just on illustration board. I just put a little medium on it, gesso or something, and then paint over the top of it. The paintings that I do, the landscapes, give me an opportunity to experiment with color and experiment with texture. I'd never done anything that was textured as an illustrator because you don't retain that in a reproduction normally. So doing it in a gallery painting, it's fun to experiment with because you can see it in the painting when it's hanging on the wall.
Yeah.
Again, these are just sketches.
That was yesterday Seth and I hopped on Zoom and got on your website, both your portfolio website and your gallery website. And I was, one of the things I commented on was your incredible use of texture. I tend to do a little bit of collage, so texture gets me excited.
I have fun with the texture. It's a lot of fun. You see that one?
That's gorgeous.
Get that to where you can see it. The color doesn't translate real well, but you get a feel for sort of an abstraction of design and emphasis on pattern and color, texture.
Yeah, beautiful. Just gorgeous.
Thank you. This is another one that I just finished last week. It's a night scene, obviously.
It's beautiful, Bart.
This is oil on canvas, and there's a lot of texturing going on in here.
This is going to sound like maybe a strange question, but how did you determine your signature? Your fine art signature is totally different than your illustration signature.
My illustration signature, I had people tell me it was unreadable.
Oh.
It was known to people that bought me as an illustrator, but I decided, maybe I need to make it real clear what my name is. So I started. I go back and forth.
That's beautiful, Bart.
I guess that's all I brought down here.
That's fantastic.
You could do this all day long. I've done so much work over the years. Paperbacks, record albums, stamps, events, Kentucky Derby, Indianapolis 500. I've done America's Cup paintings. I've done so much stuff. It's possible to sit here for a long time and bore you stiff with.
No, not at all.
I'm not actually sure you could bore Seth stiff.
No.
This is like Christmas morning for him.
Good. That's good. I'm glad. Have I used up all the time, or do we?
Oh, we're so good. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for making time for us. This has been really special.
Thank you, Bart.
I hope I've said something that might have some meaning to your students, maybe inspire them, or at least create some thought.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Really appreciate it.
You're most welcome. I enjoyed it.
Bart, can I show you one thing before we go?
Sure. Absolutely.
It's when I was a student, we had to pick an illustrator and do a master replica. I looked through my portfolios and I couldn't find the master or the original, but I took one of your jockey pieces and I tried to I tried to imitate it, not knowing when I was 19 years old. But I wanted
you did a pretty good job.
To keep it. Well, thank you, Bart, because I'm embarrassed and ashamed to show it, but I'm not lying to you, my friend. You are God in my eyes, and the fact that we got to talk like this and I could share you my little meager wannabe illustration skills as a kid, it was nice to be able to share that with you. So thank you for everything.
Great. You bet. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're fantastic.
Thank you so much. Any students have any last questions you want to ask? We'll give them just a second.
Okay.
They were really good at getting their questions in, and I was streaming them in as we pulled it off.
Good.
Alrighty, I think that's it. Bart, have a most fantastic rest of your day.
Well, you do the same. I hope everybody's back to work soon and out of the house.
Us too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bart.
Have a great day.
Stay well.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye-bye.